Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Talking City podcast brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. My name is Dan Murphy, and joining me today, as ever, is Mr. Joe Bray. Joe, long drive back last night from down in the West Country. How are we feeling? A bit not too tired, I hope.
Well, I'm a bit tired, but I think you'd have to ask Si because he was the one doing the actual driving. I was just getting a nice little ride back up the M6.
Well, Si, you're back with us, of course, Mr. Simon Bajkowski. Si, how are you doing if you had to do all the heavy lifting down to Bristol last night?
I was absolutely fine last night until I got home and realised I didn't have a key to get in.
Oh no!
So that was disappointing, but as you can see, I have made it inside the premises now. So
was it more disappointing for you or for the poor person who had to let you in at God knows what hour?
I mean, I'm biased, but I'd say me.
I want a kind of a neutral opinion on that, but I don't know if we're going to get one. I can certainly see someone not being best pleased with being woken up in the dead of night. But, onto football matters, of course, because it's been quite a good week for Manchester City, of course. 2 games, 2 wins, 7 goals, only the one consolation conceded. On the weekend, City put forward past Bournemouth as they kind of returned to winning ways. Julian Alvarez, Erling Haaland, Phil Foden and an own goal, getting the job done before Jefferson Lerma whacked one in late on. And then last night, of course, in Bristol, City advanced in the FA Cup with a 3-0 win over Bristol City. Phil Foden again with the goals, and then Kevin de Bruyne smashing one in from distance. Joe, you were at both matches. Have you kind of noticed maybe I wouldn't exactly say transformation or anything from City, but to me it looks like they're kind of back to what we expect them to do. They're just putting teams like this to the sword with minimum fuss, and they haven't been doing that recently, so it's, even though it's kind of par for the course, it's good to see them back doing what they do best. Yeah,
City should be scoring 7 goals in these 2 games and should be looking fairly comfortable and rotating players, and that's what they did. But because of, for example, the Nottingham Forest trip where they got a draw and just couldn't finish the chances, and the Leipzig trip where, yes, they wanted a bit more control rather than going all out for the winner, but it felt like there was a little bit more that the team could give. And as soon as they started at Bournemouth, you could see that there was just a little bit more aggression, if you like. The atmosphere threatened to sort of be like it was at Nottingham Forest, where the crowd was going to really get on the sort of coattails of the home side, doing quite a bit of sort of defensive and putting their bodies in front of things. City scored an early goal, both at Bournemouth and at Bristol City, and controlled the crowd, controlled the opposition, made the opposition think, right, what we're going to do here? Do we stay with the game plan, or do we come out? And at half time at Bournemouth, it was 3-0. It took a little bit longer at Bristol for the second and third goals to come, but it was 2 very controlled performances. And I think we were speaking after the Forest game and saying, yes, City should have won by a lot of goals. The performances we've seen in the last 3 or 4 days have been what we should have seen at Nottingham Forest, because City were clinical, they took the chances, and a lot of good players had a lot of good performances.
Yeah, absolutely, Si. It feels like that cutting edge is just back a bit. As Joe rightly points out, the games against RB Leipzig and Forest, and as Guardiola kind of multiple times said to Joe, proving him right in the press conference last week, City they played well in those games. They found Haaland was involved, and they had plenty of chances. They just weren't taking them, or only took one, and then proved costly when they couldn't kill games off. But in both these matches, both these 2 long away trips, that's exactly what they did. Bournemouth especially, as Joe mentions, 3-0 up by half time, and it was just game over at that point.
Yeah. The Bournemouth game felt similar to the Villa game earlier in the month, that also felt like a big step forward, where they kind of battered them in the first 60 minutes and then made loads of changes and lost a bit of composure and balance, I guess, by making all those changes. Bristol was kind of a harder game than Bournemouth almost. They certainly troubled City a lot more, but at the same time, you kind of weren't worried about City. Like when they've been conceding like to Forest, it's because they've almost been asleep. Whereas these last two games, they've just looked more alive to everything, and they've got a very, very happy manager as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's too early to say yet. Like, is this the turning point? Is this when the runs start happening? Because as you kind of correctly point out, we said this after Villa, after Arsenal, and then what do they do after those seemingly kind of turning point matches? They then go and drop points, and it's now going to be a case of trying to string. I think me and Joe talked about last week, it doesn't really seem this season that a 10, 15, 18 game winning streak might not be needed this season, just because of how inconsistent. Arsenal have dropped points here and there, even though they've got 2 wins on the spin now. But it doesn't feel like it's one of those seasons when it's going to be, a 98-point lead or whatever. So as long as they can get a few wins together, they may have a shout, especially with Arsenal. A few tougher fixtures on the horizon. But let's kind of talk about the star of the show over the last 2 matches, Joe, and that is Phil Foden back into the team, the starting 11 for the first time in quite a while. I can't imagine it's the first time he started 2 games on the spin in quite some time, but he's certainly delivered in those 3 goals in 2 games. Unlucky for it not to be 4 after the 4th against Bournemouth was ruled as an own goal in the end, but was that Alvarez? Actually, ignore me. I just absolutely dropped a ball there. But we carry on anyway. 3 goals in 2 games, and he's looking much more like the player we saw earlier this season, and of course, over the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's still not a bad record, is it, in those games? And also, if you go back another appearance at Nottingham Forest, he was the one creating so many chances and getting behind his fullback time after time, and he's just been very good since he's come back. And I think Guardiola said he's got the confidence back, which also tallies with the fact that he's feeling a bit better after his injury, and he had that sort of recurring foot injury that appears to have been troubling him a little bit and affecting how he was performing. So if he's over that, and he's been playing very well in the last couple of games. There was a moment at Bristol City where he just controlled a high ball he just sort of killed it dead, but also took it past his defender in the same movement, and the whole crowd, who were firmly behind Bristol City, all just sort of gasped because it was just so good. But he had his fullback on toast all game, and Foden went where he wanted. The fullback tried to follow but couldn't, and no, this is the Foden that City want to see. And it's interesting because he was playing at Forest and at Bournemouth on the right wing because Jack Grealish has been playing so well, and then Grealish gets a rest and Foden looks even better back on the left wing, where he's been playing sort of at his sort of best in the last season or 2. So I don't know what Guardiola does with that wing now, because you've also got Mahrez, who got an assist against Bristol City and has hardly been playing badly on the right. So having 3 very good, very informed wingers has got to be a positive problem for Guardiola to have, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely, Si. I mean, Foden there, 2 games, but it's in the sort of opponents, not to kind of disrespect Bournemouth or Bristol, but it is the sort of smaller games where Guardiola does tend to, and as he did, make rotations and whatnot. Is Foden still in this second string, and can he kind of jump more into the first team? We've got a big week coming up against Newcastle, and then obviously the Champions League back soon as well. Will Foden get into the team for those sort of fixtures, the more important ones on paper, the tougher games, or is he still behind Mahrez and Grealish?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because Foden on that form, I take the point about the opposition, but like that touch that Joe just talked about would beat any defender in the world. And when he is on the form that he is on, you think he's too good for anyone. At the same time, Riyad Mahrez got an assist last night and Jack Grealish got an assist. So I was just looking up then, since the World Cup, between them, they have got 21 goals and assists in 17 appearances. So with Mahrez and Grealish, you're still getting more than a goal a game. So I mean, there's always big calls around Guardiola's decision making, but it's a huge call to leave out one of Grealish or Mahrez when there is that guarantee that you're going to get goals and assists. But what a turnaround. Probably a month ago, well, Mahrez and Grealish have been the exception, but in most of the positions in the pitch, we've been saying, well, who on earth do you play there? Because nobody's in form. Whereas now you've got Foden showing himself to be at his exciting best, and you've also got these two guys who have been so good and so consistent for the team. So very, very bright for City.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine 21 goals. Say that must be kind of the vast majority of City's goals since the World Cup as well. I don't have the stats to hand, I'd imagine, but it seems like they're involved in pretty much everything City are doing. So, as we've said many times, Guardiola doesn't really like in the big matches changing winning formulas, so to speak, that often. So yeah, I think Foden may still have to vie his time somewhat given the form of those ahead of him, but as you say, good options is better than no options, isn't it? And one man who's certainly kind of holding down the fort in that attack is Erling Haaland. He got back on the score sheet down at Bournemouth, Joe, and it's breaking more records. He's now scored the most goals in a single Premier League season for City, taking that of Sergio Aguero. He's now 7 or 8 away from being the all-time record league scorer, regardless of how many games there was in a season. And as my research kind of found, the player to score the most goals in a single campaign, regardless of it being Premier League or First Division, for City was way back in 1929 and stands at 38. So I think Haaland's coming from all the records, and he got a well-deserved rest against Bristol City, one that I'm sure many fans were happy to see. But against Bournemouth, he too was looking that bit more sharper, that bit more involved after the kind of frustrations of Leipzig and Forest.
Yeah, and I think yes, he scored a goal again and sort of silenced those critics, and he's whenever he goes on a run without scoring, that run is only 2 games or 3 games. And we spoke, didn't we, about the Forest game, and he should have scored those chances against Leipzig. He just didn't get the service, but it seemed like there was just a better plan against Bournemouth, and that was helped by putting Julian Alvarez sort of in that role behind him with Kevin de Bruyne out, and it gave sort of the Bournemouth defenders had to decide whether you follow Alvarez or Haaland, but it also meant that when Haaland did hit the bar again, this time it was more unlucky, it was deflected onto the bar. Alvarez was in the right place to do it, and I think they worked quite well together. That was probably the best that I've seen those two in that sort of partnership, where Alvarez is a bit behind and Alvarez was just sort of popping up in the little spaces behind, and in turn that gave Haaland a lot more space to sort of manipulate in that defence, and he got 1 goal, could have had 2, but it was a much more promising performance. And I'll say that it was probably a similar performance. Haaland always does the same thing, doesn't he? It's just whether he gets the service or not, or whether he does finish those chances. And the fact that he's on a goal a game, or now more than a goal a game, you can't argue with that. And we said, didn't we, if you were offered that at the start of the season, you're going to take it. And if he continues that, he's going to break a lot of records and probably win City a couple of trophies in the process. So I think they'd be very happy with how he played at Bournemouth, and also happy to give him a rest at Bristol.
Absolutely, and we discussed at length that any kind of criticism of City in general, and especially Haaland, is kind of always got to be taken with a pinch of salt. It's just because when no one's saying they're absolutely dreadful when they have 2 or 3 bad games, but thus their standards are so high, the slightest drop seems a bit more of a crisis. But Si, you've not been on the show last couple of episodes now. What do you kind of make of Haaland's displays against Leipzig and Forest, and that kind of debate that comes up again of how involved he is? And against Leipzig, you kind of see on his face at times there was the frustration of he's making the run after run after run, and City players are just either not finding him on purpose or just not having the good quality of pass into him. Against Leipzig, he went through on one occasion when he was slid in by Grealish, and no surprise there, but he couldn't take that chance. It was a bit of a he wanted the service in those games, but against Forest as well. But when he got the chances, he didn't take them, and they did end up proving costly in those games. So again, no one's saying Haaland's bad. He's got 30 odd goals already. It's absolutely ridiculous. But it is interesting how this kind of debate still lingers on, regardless.
Yeah, what have you made of the debate around nobody finding Alvarez's runs last night? Oh wait, there isn't one. No, there isn't one.
We said
that,
this. We
it?
said this last week. No one's ever bothered if it's Callum Wilson not being found in a run who scored no goals in the last 3 weeks or whatever and didn't score in the cup final, but Haaland has the temerity not to score in one game, and it's all panic stations.
Yeah. We turned to each other in the first half because Alvarez was getting like so frustrated that he kept making these runs and no one would find him, and it was like, well, yeah, at least there is consistency in the team play, even if there is not consistency in the debate around it. It's going to come because Haaland's such a high-profile figure and because he scores so many goals. I think the thing was at Forest, his miss was as bad as his miss in the Community Shield. After the Community Shield, a lot of people laughed at him and said, well, how's this guy going to adjust to English football? And it's gone pretty well for him, you'd have to say. So, anyone who watched the Forest game and has half a brain should be able to think that, he's just going to continue scoring loads of goals, isn't he? And I think Joe was saying at Bournemouth, there was like a question on like how well Bournemouth did containing him. We got a goal and an assist. So those are the ridiculous standards that Haaland has set, whereby only scoring one means that you've done very well as an opposition team. I try not to speak about this because it's so boring, but it's going to go on and on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and as you know, sadly, we'll have to keep talking unless he literally continues to score in every single game for the rest of the season. Maybe that's it. The next game he doesn't score in, we'll have to bring it back up, sadly. But if he keeps on scoring, we should be okay. But one player who's also having a really good season, of course, was recalled Lewis Joe. He came back in against Bournemouth and Bristol as well. But Guardiola full of praise for him after the match, and even kind of suggested he has a future in midfield. Considering he still has high hopes of Foden going into midfield one day, it looks like City really set for the foreseeable in that department. Who needs Jude Bellingham? But it was his first game back in for a few matches now. He's kind of taken a back seat while City kind of had got back into form. But how did he fit back into it? I think he said himself after the match, like, took him 5 minutes to kind of get into the rhythm of it. But once you're back in the flow, it was kind of second nature.
You notice opposition sides pushing him a little bit and trying to exploit that area that he will inevitably leave behind because he's going into sort of the base of midfield. But there was one, it was for the first goal at Bournemouth. Lewis sort of steams in with a tackle that he probably had no right to win. The defender just runs out of the way because he sees him coming, and City start the move and go and score the goal. And from then, he was very solid as he always is, and City's defensive shape allowed him to be. And the fact that he's got players like Diaz now's back, and Nathan Ake can sort of swap between the left back and sort of left of a back three role. He's got that protection, and he was very good in the first half at Bournemouth as City were sort of taking control of the game. And then when they made some tactical changes, but also personnel changes after half time, you slowly saw Lewis popping up in attack and playing further forward, and he was making the run to the byline that was at the heart of the fourth goal that definitely killed the game. His cross was cut out, but it then went to Foden and then Alvarez for an own goal. And just later on in the game, he just kept popping up more in that number 8 position. And you've got Sergio Gomez came on and played in midfield, Maximo Perrone as well. And it was a really inexperienced midfield. And maybe that's why Bournemouth got their chance to get back into the game and create a couple of chances. But it was a sort of more deliberate effort to put Lewis into the attack, and Guardiola said afterwards that he has the qualities to play as a number 8. I don't know if he said number 10, but he was looking at sort of those attacking positions and saying he's one of the sort of cleverest players that City have, and he said that again at Bristol City, that he touched the ball most in the first half because everyone was passing to him, and he was again playing more deep and alongside Kalvin Phillips, probably to give him a bit more protection because Phillips has played less games. This was his first 90 minutes. But the fact that City players trust him so much to sort of fire these balls in, really sort of pressured situations when you got 3 or 4 opposition players around you, he just keeps on going and going. And I don't think Guardiola's had a bad word to say about him yet, which he often does. There was one point in the game where he sort of hooked a blind ball forward and it went out of play. And normally you'd expect Guardiola and a couple of the senior players to have a go at him. And you could see Guardiola and De Bruyne were a little bit annoyed, but it wasn't at Lewis. It was like, why did no one give him an option? Because Lewis can play that sort of short ball under pressure. The fact that he's had to hook it forward out of play seems to be someone else's fault, not Lewis's.
Yeah, I could see Guardiola being a bit like that Gordon Ramsay meme where it's like, to recall Lewis is like, oh, you're so good, it's okay, we will get past it. And then to anyone else, it's just, you effing donkey. But, he's good and he really likes him. But from one player who's played a lot more than we expected this season to another side, and that is Maximo Perrone, in the fact that we didn't think he'd play at all for City this season. But he came on for his debut, got about 20 minutes down in Bournemouth. How do you think he did on his surprise debut?
Yeah, looks all right, doesn't he? Nice touch. I think Guardiola spoke about him before the Bristol game and said, he's quicker in the head than the legs, and they're not sure that he'll stay. All the best people are not sure that he'll stay beyond this season with City or whether he'll go out on loan. But they've been really impressed with him in training. He's come fit and willing to work and with an instant impact, and they've liked what they've seen from him. So he's, when you're at a big club like City, you've got to take every chance that comes your way, and he has done that with the few he's had so far.
Well, we'll bring part one of the podcast to a close there. We'll be back in just a moment to delve into the win over Bristol City. Don't go anywhere. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Talking City podcast. This is part two and we'll delve right into the 3-0 win over Bristol. And it was a second start for Kalvin Phillips down in the West Country. How did he do? It's obviously been a tough start for him at City, but he's he got his first start, second start I should say, and finally looking a bit like he belongs there a little bit.
Yeah, it was... It was quite funny at the beginning of the game. He hits the bar within 70 seconds of kickoff, and you're like, right, okay. And then from the next play, Bristol City just like push him easily aside, knock the ball over Akanji's head, and nearly score. And it's like, right, you've got something whether they win or lose here tonight. But he settled. And he was very unfussy. Joe's written about it, but he, didn't really create too much attention after those first 2 minutes. And Guardiola said all the time about how he likes his defensive midfielders not to make any headlines, and Kalvin Phillips will make headlines for a while more until he starts playing more regularly. But you'd like to think that last night was kind of the first step on the road, the first proper step on the road to him becoming kind of less of a talking point at City, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's obviously been a strange situation, given he had to go under shoulder surgery and didn't return from the World Cup in the best condition after not being able to. He didn't play for a month, basically, did he? So it's understandable. But I thought Guardiola was quite interesting last week in his press conference ahead of Forest when he said he'd love to play him more. I mean, he could do it if he wanted to do it so much, but obviously Rodri is there. He's unshakable. He's apart from that. Was it Tottenham when he had had a bit of a wayward game? Otherwise, he's such a linchpin of that side. It's nearly impossible to dislodge him. But I found it quite interesting how he spoke so highly of what Phillips brings to the team. He said how important. It basically said having a good dressing room would be more important than any stats or any metrics or any technology. And Phillips is such a big part of that, which I suppose it's almost like the Fabian Delph role. So maybe Phillips will be the next left back in the coming weeks and months.
I think he should try and perfect his defensive midfield role first before thinking about sort of taking over at left back. And also, yeah, you can be a good sort of character in the dressing room, but you also need to play football at City, and he's clearly a good footballer. And I think he was just sort of, as we've said, he was just sort of good, and he just went under the radar at Bristol, which is exactly what you need and what he probably needed. And the fact that this was his first 90 minutes since last season for club, it shows just how little football he's played. I think his 90 minutes at Bristol City account for 30% of his whole minutes all season, which again highlights he's not played in this system. When he's come in, it's been late on, and he's not been able to do stuff. I remember in pre-season he was coming on and playing in defence because there are no defenders in America. So I think he's lacked that sort of preparation time, and the injuries came at a bad time. But the FA Cup games like this, away at a Championship side, he's got plenty of experience in the Championship. He'll know what the atmosphere is all about. So he should have relished this chance, and I think he did. And I think the best compliment you can give him is the fact that he was just okay, and City didn't have to change the system too much to accommodate him. Yes, they brought Bernardo back a little bit after, Bernardo was way out on the wing helping Phil Foden terrorise his defender, but they did drop him back into defence just for sort of a bit more control to stop the counter-attacks, and it worked. But I think a quiet sort of unspectacular performance like this one will do him the world of good, and he's probably hoping for one of the Championship sides in the next round just to sort of guarantee him another performance, something to look forward to and aim for and keep the confidence going. But it was interesting, Guardiola said after the game he did well, and also we can rely on him, which he's sort of stopped short of saying before. So the more he plays, the better for City, that they've got someone not to replace Rodri, but I think his role this season will just be to give Rodri a rest in these cup games.
Well, the draw is held on Wednesday, so it may well have happened by the time you hear about this, and hopefully another kind of good opponent for City, and Phillips can get more minutes. And someone who's been getting a lot of minutes in the last few weeks, Si, and someone you singled out for praise after the game is Ruben Dias. How kind of important has him being back in the team been? It seems like City are so much more secure now, just with a really steady hand. Someone, as Joe says there, they really can just rely on to just do the defensive work right in that back three, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think especially when it becomes a back three rather than a back four, you kind of need even more someone like Dias to be there and hold everything together, because everything gets a bit more loose. It's quite an interesting one with Dias, because it's almost like his best qualities are kind of intangible, in that he sort of shouts a lot and organises a lot and just has this aura about him that says nobody is scoring past us today. I'm going to make it personally responsible, and you will make me very, very upset and angry if you let anyone past you. Obviously, he's great, kind of no-nonsense, making tackles and interceptions and blocks, and he reads the game fantastically well. But it's that aura about him, and that, kind of celebrating your mini victories in defence, that City have kind of missed. And when Guardiola was on his Happy Flowers rant and sort of spoke about the lack of characters that they've got, Dias has just been so important to restoring that, because he just brings this attitude with him that City won't concede, and they've not done a very good job of not conceding in the last month. I think that's the first clean sheet in 7, but Dias kind of has put them on the right road, and when he plays, the whole defence is better for him being in the team. So, he I think he lost his place the beginning of this season. And when everyone's fit, that's another decision for Guardiola. But right now, you would think every big game from now until the end of the season, you want Dias in the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see no argument there. But, a place where there is a lot of argument being had at late, Joe, is, of course, on that goalkeeper position. And it's one that took an interesting turn on Tuesday, given the fact that Ortega did start the match as expected in the Cup, but picked up a knock and had to be taken off at the break, which I'm sure Ederson's detractors would have been loath to see. Ederson did come on for the second half, so a clean sheet for both of them, but this adds an interesting wrinkle to that debate, I think, seeing them both kind of back to back. And of course, Guardiola was finally asked about it. I'm sure that would have put many of the Bray and Ederson critics at ease. And, well, his answer may well not have done, though, because they basically said, I think, what we've been saying, like, he's essential to how we play. And that's the reality, I believe, is what Harry said it. And, Ederson's been a brilliant keeper, so integral to City's success. And regardless, and hopefully Ortega's injury isn't serious or anything, of course, but it doesn't look like he'll be in the team for League and Champions League matches anytime soon.
Yeah, it was. We didn't really learn anything at Bristol City. We might have done if Ortega had a good or bad game, but he didn't really do anything good or bad. He saved one routine shot. He was okay at sort of distributing the ball, not great, not terrible, and then he seemed to pick up some sort of injury, carried on, and then couldn't come out for the second half. So we didn't really learn if Ortega is this spectacular keeper that some people are saying, or he isn't. I suppose what you do want from your keeper is just to do the basics right, and he did that. But no, depending on how his injury is, he's not going to be playing anytime soon in the league. And again, his next and only appearance might be in the next round. But Guardiola seemed bemused that it was even a question. He's from the moment Ortega's come in, he's always been the definite number two, and he will always play in the domestic cup games, and maybe there's a Champions League game where there's sort of less importance on the result. But no, I think Guardiola was very clear that Ederson is key to how City plays, important in the build-up, and will continue to be the number one keeper. So I think that's a reminder that sort of football does exist outside of Twitter as well.
Yeah, well, honestly, I was so tempted to ask Guardiola about it last week until he went on a 10-minute answer and we all got kind of, the time ran out. But I was like, before thinking about it, I was like really worried that he'd think I thought that Ederson was bad and that I'd ask the question, he'd look at me like I'm some dummy and I'd just absolutely crumble like a leaf in autumn. But thankfully, I didn't do it. But maybe Si will give me the same reaction right now. So I don't know if you've been party to this debate that's been raging amongst certain social media circles.
I was the dummy. I was the one who asked him about Ederson.
Wow. Did he give you a scornful look, or was he quite diplomatic?
It was. It's really hard, isn't it? It's hard to get into what people think. So I sort of phrased it as like some fans.
I do not think this, but some do.
Yeah. And he was like, well, "What do you mean by some fans? How many fans?" And it's difficult, but as I said to him, like more fans than you would think are saying this. And even, I was getting like people after the Bournemouth game saying, "Oh, good performance, but Ederson needs to be dropped." You're thinking, what on earth has he done against Bournemouth to warrant getting...
Didn't save a volley from about 8 yards. That was whacked straight at him, like, powerfully past him.
I mean, they had Ederson to thank for winning 4-1 and not 4-3, I think.
And not losing to Leipzig.
Yeah. But Ederson is not really a goalkeeper who saves shots, and he's not in the team for that. But it still requires you to kind of put sort of some preconceived ideas about goalkeeping and football to one side to be able to be fully at peace with that. And also, I don't think that Ederson's been great this season. And once you get into that run where you're conceding from nearly every first shot on target, it's difficult to come out of it. Claudio Bravo was Pep's big signing when he came to City, ousted Joe Hart, who everyone loved, and brought in this guy to play his football. And Bravo was unfortunately depicted as a hologram because everything just went straight through him. And he never recovered from that. And Ederson was bought after 12 months. So, Ederson can't afford to get that reputation. But at the same time, as Guardiola says, like, he's done so much. We've all watched them play for the last 6 years. We know what he does. We know what he's good at. We know what he's not so good at. You know, he's never going to save the shots that Alisson saves or David De Gea saves. But have you watched Alisson or David De Gea try and play out from the back? Because
probably not going to pass it straight to the opposition without
precisely.
10 yards from goal. Or give it to Benzema.
And, you know, I think Guardiola would say if you are trying to sign a goalkeeper who saves a lot of shots, then you're sort of on to a loser from the beginning, because your fundamental point should be you protect your goalkeeper by keeping the ball and attacking the other end. So, I mean, ideally, you get someone that has it all, and Ortega has more of it all than any previous number 2 at City, and that's why he's pushing Ederson harder than anyone else. But, you know, he's also made big errors in games this season, so there isn't the perfect goalkeeper. And, you know, we'll wait and see on Ortega's injury, but perhaps last night has kind of taken the sting out of that particular debate.
Yeah, of course, we wish Ortega all the best, but if it edges closer to Scott Carson getting another game, I think we can all, appreciate that silver lining. And speaking of, there was a final one with City's final goal of the game against Bristol. Kevin de Bruyne, a really stunning goal from about 30-odd yards, bottom corner. He's had a difficult few weeks, Joe. He's been finding it kind of hard to really get into games and influence them as much as he used to. I mean, he's still got about 17 assists, so again, any criticism, pinch of salt, etc. and so on. But I think it's fair to say he's not been at his best in recent weeks, but maybe now he's fine. I know he's been ill the last 2 games as well, of course. Unused substitute against Bournemouth, but this, he looked involved a bit here. I know it's against lower league opposition, but this was kind of feel like a good match to get him into that rhythm again and hopefully approaching his best once more.
Yeah, and Guardiola said he wasn't happy with De Bruyne in the first half. He wasn't aggressive enough. He wasn't getting in the right positions, and had a word with him after half-time, and he was a lot better and a lot more aggressive. But a poor Kevin De Bruyne in the first half still put a very, very good ball through to Riyad Mahrez for City's opening goal, and just broke the defence with one pass. And even if he wasn't at his best, he still strode forward and curled that beauty into the bottom corner. So even when he's not playing well, Kevin De Bruyne's getting a goal and sort of one of those pre-assists, if you like. And yeah, he doesn't seem as untouchable as he was. And maybe that's down to form or other players playing well. And Guardiola's spoken about playing Alvarez in that sort of number 10 role, if you like, behind the striker, just to get more bodies in the box and sort of floating the idea that De Bruyne can't do everything. But I would say that, yeah, even when he's not at his best, he's still a very good player and will still be very influential for City for the rest of the season. And they need players like that, because there were just a few moments where his touch was so much, about 3 or 4 thoughts ahead of the Bristol City players, and it emphasised the difference between the two sides, because he wasn't just clearing the ball or passing to a teammate. He was thinking, right, what's going to happen in 3 or 4 moves down the line in this sort of phase of play. And we were speaking about brains and legs before. His brain is definitely still there, and he just needs a bit more rhythm probably to get back in, and he'll probably go on and score very important goals for City later on in the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's what I was just going to say. Si, it's it was some goal as it was, but how important is De Bruyne kind of getting back to, or at least approaching his best form, going to be for City if they are to kind of claw the Premier League off Arsenal or even win the Champions League?
He's kind of like the guarantee. Like we were talking about Foden earlier and saying if he is in his best form, he has to play. If De Bruyne is anywhere near his best form, he will play every single big game. And, he dragged them to the title last year with just an astonishing run of games, really from December right to May. But, especially when things got a bit tight, City need to win at Wolves. All right, De Bruyne is just going to score a first half hat-trick, all with his weaker foot. It was like stupidly good, things like that. And yeah, this season he's looked more kind of off it than he ever has. But like Joe said, even when he's not fully on it, he still offers so much. And if he can work his way to get back to his best, then that is when you would start thinking about those long winning runs for City, or those big knockout wins in the Champions League, because obviously Haaland is going to have a lot to say in those matches, but De Bruyne is still so important to kind of how City tick going forward.
Absolutely. We'll bring part 2 of the podcast to a close there. We'll be back in just a moment to look forward to the weekend's game against Newcastle and some exciting developments at the ETIHAD Stadium. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Talking City podcast. Before we delve into the weekend's fixture, Joe, some exciting, as I say, developments coming along at the Etihad Stadium, some intriguing plans in place. Why don't you tell the listeners all about it?
Yeah, well, City have, before Christmas, opened the sort of feasibility studies, if you like, to expanding the North Stand at the Etihad, and they unveiled some concept sketches this week, which look pretty exciting. It's not going to be a case of just adding a third tier like the other 3 stands on that end of the ground. It's going to be sort of an expanded, I mean, according to these plans, if they go ahead and if they're approved, it would be an expanded second tier, around sort of 7,000-ish seats to take the capacity over 60,000, which would potentially take it towards a sort of second highest capacity in the Premier League. I know Tottenham have 62, Arsenal and West Ham have 60, and I think Liverpool, if their Anfield Road expansion goes ahead, that's 61. So it'll be on a par with those stadiums, but it's also going to have, again, if these plans do come to fruition, a sort of integrated new sort of structure out of the back of the North Stand, with the sort of where the City Square area is, more of a covered sort of fan area with food and drink outlets and hospitality, and I think 3,000 fans it'll be able to hold, and a hotel and a new club shop and museum, and it'll just make that sort of side of the Etihad a bit more modern, a bit more sort of fit for purpose for a whole match day experience. And they keep stressing it, they want it to be like a 365-day-a-year destination, and with the new arena that's being built at the bottom of the other side of the tram tracks, it could be quite an exciting development. But it'll take 3 years at least, and a lot of sort of hurdles to overcome. But it seems like plans are going ahead, and now there's these images. It looks quite exciting for City fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you say, that the developments in the City Square area really do sound quite intriguing, and I think it's similar to what Tottenham wanted to do, wasn't it? Where you don't just go for the match, you go an hour before, you stay for an hour after, you enjoy the drinks and the food on offer and have a good time. But I think some fans of other clubs on social media will laugh at this announcement, throw the empty ad jokes about and question why they're expanding the capacity, even though it isn't full. That's obviously a stupid view to take, Si, but why exactly is it so?
I just think, City's, I think they've sold out every Premier League game this season. And Champions League has been more like, 50,000 rather than, I don't think it's been below 50,000 from a 55,000 capacity. City have had the potential to expand the North Stand for quite a few years now, and this year they've decided to do it. I feel like the people who are experts on City's attendances on social media, like, as we well know from the financial reports and everything else, like City are pretty meticulous about money. I don't think they would be expanding the North Stand if they did not think that the demand was there for it, and the sort of financial incentive was there for it, because they're not a club that just says, oh, well, we're going to lose money off this because no one will come, but at least we can say we have a bigger capacity. Like, it's just nonsense to anyone who is kind of remotely has a business brain. People will still say, oh, it's the ETIHAD, and all the rest of the rest of the nonsense, but it's not backed up by anything. So, I think the idea that City would decide to expand even though they didn't think they could fill the seats is pretty silly.
And hopefully all those detractors on social media will hear that. I don't know. I'd be surprised if they stumbled across this podcast somehow.
But they're gonna say it anyway, aren't they? So
exactly.
You know.
But as long as City are happy with it, then
we
that's all
ignore
that
those people because they're idiots.
Exactly. And speaking of the Etihad, City will finally be back there on Saturday after 5 games away. They take on Newcastle, Joe. A Newcastle that have just come off the back of a disappointing and quite meek loss in the Carabao Cup final. They are certainly looking leggy and tired as the season kind of wears on, despite all their unlimited resources. They certainly don't have that much in terms of kind of quality backup in that squad. They'll still be without, I presume, they'll be. Was Pope's suspension 1 game or 2 games? Is Pope back?
Just one game, I think.
At that beforehand. Just 1 game. Also, they will have Nick Pope back, even though Loris Karius didn't. I was going to say didn't shame himself or anything like that in the final, but they could be without a key midfielder in Bruno Guimaraes, who did go off injured. How do you see this game planning out?
I think if City had picked a time to play Newcastle this season, it would be directly after they just lost that cup final, because I don't know, it all seemed like it was going so high for Newcastle, and then it might have just been one step too far emotionally and physically, and the fans will have put a lot of effort into to go into that final, and so will the players, and then it sort of was a bit of an anticlimax when it came to it, and United were just better on the day in that cup final. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond. Maybe they'll have a point to prove and see that they want to bounce back and be quite dangerous, and they were dangerous at St James's Park, weren't they? They gave City a real run for the money, and probably would have won on another day. So it'll be far from easy for City, and I think we can expect Guardiola to praise them to the hilt in his press conference. But also, you look at them and their form, and they've just been beaten by one of the worst Liverpool sides in years. City should be sort of doing the same thing to them, and sort of just picking off their weaknesses. And if they've not got Bruno Guimaraes, that's a boost for City. And City are the form team. I think of all the times to play Newcastle, it's this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, they played early in the season. It was quite a thrilling 3-3 draw, but I think it's clear Newcastle have lost a bit of that early verve they had. That was, what's the word? Propelled them so far up the table. We got there in the end. They've lost a bit of that energy they had in the early, that early season optimism. That you say, as Joe says, they're disappointed coming off of that. I think they'll want to go into this match and be like, put that game right. Maybe it'll be the opposite, where they've probably not done themselves justice at Wembley, let themselves down a little bit. Maybe they'll come to the Etihad wanting to make that right. But I think given the direction both teams are going, it seems like one that City should kind of win.
Yeah, I mean, for the first time this season, there are kind of questions about Newcastle because they've performed beyond expectations and made the top 4 and been in the title race, I suppose. And then they've kind of not been playing terrifically well sort of in 2023. But that's kind of been masked by, well, they've got through to the cup final and all this for the cup final, and then that kind of imploded with Pope's red card, and then I don't think they performed anywhere near to the best of their ability against United, and against a United team that were not invincible. So yeah, I can't think of any worse fixture for Newcastle than Manchester City away this weekend, because they've got to pick themselves up from that cup game and show that they are still mean business in the league and can still make the top 4 and can, put a run together and recover the form that made them so good for so much of the season. And they've got to do it at the Etihad against a City team that are looking, the best they've looked for a few months themselves. So I think it will be pretty attritional. and City are really going to have to work. And if you're Newcastle, you probably take a 0-0. But yeah, it's going to be really tough for Newcastle if City say score early as they have done. A lot of eyes will be on them to say, well, what have you got left in the tank? Because it's going to be very easy to make the case that they've not got enough left.
Mm-hmm. Joe, I think a lot of the team will pretty much pick itself. You'd imagine Haaland, Rodri, Grealish all return here. But as we kind of touched on earlier in the podcast, the biggest kind of one-up for debate is Foden. He's played really well in the last 2 games. Has he earned a spot in this match? A league game with obviously much trickier opposition, or can you not look past Riyad Mahrez and Grealish?
I genuinely don't know, because you look at Foden at Bristol City and you think, yeah, he's got to start, but then you look at Grealish's record and the stat we mentioned before about how many goals him and Mahrez are contributing. It depends what kind of game Guardiola wants. He always looks at Grealish and Mahrez for control, doesn't he? And Foden's a bit more direct and might offer a bit more risk going forward, but again, he looks unplayable in the last 2 or 3 games he's played. So I think that'll be a very interesting selection call. It was quite interesting to see Foden play inside Bernardo at times at Bristol City. So Bernardo was hugging the touchline and Foden was sort of playing in that space between the fullback and centre-back, a bit like Grealish and Mahrez did at Leipzig. So that might be a way to integrate them both, but then you still have to decide, do you drop Grealish or Mahrez? And, Bernardo as well, do you keep that? Do you put him back in the sort of false left-back position? And I don't know. I think Guardiola has a lot of good problems to have. Haaland will come back, but you look at Alvarez, who has played well behind Haaland, but maybe less so on his own. So it's his best position when Haaland is sort of alongside him or just in front of him. It's for the first time in quite a while, I think the team has a lot of different options of players in form and options that sort of Guardiola can sort of experiment with, but also he'll have to leave some informed players out, which he hasn't done really. The bench has in recent weeks been pretty expected, but now especially after sort of the progress of the last week, I think it'll be quite a difficult dynamic for Guardiola to sort of pinpoint that 11 for what he wants.
What do you reckon, sir?
Yeah, it's so hard to call, and you can imagine it fully coming down to the specific strengths of the opposition. You'd imagine it would be Kieran Trippier at right back. Do you go for Foden to take advantage of the pace if Trippier goes forward, the pace in behind, or do you have Grealish just kind of keep stretching him and keep him pegged back, basically, with what he offers? So I think the good news for City is that there aren't any bad options, although I'm sure we might be talking about one if they lose a game, but that's just us being silly. But yeah, it feels different. It feels like there has been a change at City in the last few weeks, and now you are seeing more players coming into form, and that kind of ties in with everything that's been said about the experience of the team, and they know what it takes to win a title, but also more basic for them as football players. They want to be playing in the biggest games, and the biggest games come around in April and May, so they want to be at their best for then. So I think in the coming weeks we will see more and more areas of the pitch where the selection decisions are harder.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope that change continues, but whether it does or if it does not, we'll be talking about it right here next week on the next episode of the Talkie City podcast. But this brings today's episode to a close. Listeners, thank you all very much for listening. If you'd like to watch this podcast in living colour, of course, you know where to go. It's our YouTube channel, Manchester Evening News -Man City. And if you want all our expert analysis and breaking news in the written format, you go over to the manchestereveningnews.co.uk/Manchester City and follow us on Twitter at ManCityMen and get us over on Facebook at Manchester Evening News-Manchester City. But again, that is the end of today's podcast. Thank you all very much for listening. We will see you all next week. But until then, it's goodbye for now. Ta-ra.